There was no sun to mark the passage of time. After her third mending project, Wendy began to grow restless. She asked the hovering pirates the precise o'clock, but they all shook their heads. Without a sundial, ye can't use no sun. Without a sun, ye can't use no sundial, one said, pointing to the dark gray wall of fog around the ship. And Hook don't allow no modern clocks nor watches nowhere on account of that crocodile what took his hand. It ticks like the clock is swallowed. Aha, now it made sense. She had called the creature Tick-Tock in her own telling of the story. Hook's hand had given the beast a craving for more of the pirate captain, and it followed the Jolly Roger everywhere. The noise of the clock it had swallowed always presaged its appearance. The boys would shriek with glee when Wendy said things like, "But wait, what was that? Off in the distance. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It's a crocodile!" young Michael would cry. "That thing hasn't been around for years," another pirate said. "Probably dead from indigestion. But Hook, he always thinks it's out there somewhere. He can't bear to be reminded of it. Thinks the beast is still after him," said a third. "Every time he hears a clock, it drives him batty." She wondered what happened to the crocodile in the real Neverland. She hadn't killed it off in her own stories. Yet. But despite the lack of clocks, lunch came anyway, and blessedly just in time. Wendy's stomach was growling in a most unladylike way. She followed the crew to the mess hall. Each pirate presented his own bowl to the sous chef. It was then filled with glop that might have been a chowder or a mulligatawny. One polite fellow, whose waistcoat Wendy had fixed, offered to give her his own bowl once he was done. She discreetly tried to wipe it out. The tall, slouchy pirate with 2 big gold earrings saw this and cackled. "Have you ever thought of your own you would like to be fixed?" Wendy asked him, trying to change the subject and distract attention from her covert actions. "Oh, I'm plenty handy with a needle and thread," the pirate said, posing for her. And in fact, he was more solidly distressed from the rest. Everything was mostly clean, if not perfect and unpatched. "I just don't like to get out too much, you know what I mean?" "I suppose I do," Wendy said, uncertain, as the pirate winked at her. "The name's Zane," he said with a bow. "Aladon Zane, at your service." "Wendy Darling, at yours," she said with a curtsy. "Miss Darling, what are you doing in here with these louts?" Captain Hook was suddenly filling the door like a bad omen and roaring like an enraged lion. At her dismay and the other pirate's shock, he immediately softened his voice. "My dear, you're a guest, not a midshipman. Come dine in my quarters. Mr. Smee will serve us." Wendy shivered. She might have read a few books that were not strictly approved of by father or pre-screened by the bookseller. In those typeset pages, she had glimpses of the greater world, even if she didn't fully understand it. She knew it was not proper to be alone in the company of a strange man. "Dinna worry," Zane whispered to her left ear. "He's not... Hook's a lunatic, but he loves decorum. Your maidenhood is safe with him. Not your throat, maybe, but the rest of you is." "Thank you," Wendy whispered back. Then she returned the bowl to the pirate who had provided it. "Thank you, sir, but I suppose I will be dining on the Lido deck instead. Your generosity is much appreciated." "Oh, yes, me too. Absolutely, ma'am," the pirate blustered, bowing. Lunch with a pirate captain would have been many things. Terrifying, spooky, embattled, even romantic, given the right circumstances. But in reality, the lunch was awkward. Wendy sat up properly and used her best manners. Captain Hook bowed and flourished and removed his hat and pulled out a chair for her. The table was a tiny folding out thing spread with a fancy cloth, silver utensils, and a clever golden candelabrum that was held upright or so it didn't tip with the waves. It was all very lovely, and for the first moment, Wendy was overcome with the precise perfection of the scene. There was even a spinet piano in the corner of the room. I do play, if you're wondering, Hook said, following her eyes. A bit harder since Hook, but I make do. They settled down to the empty places. Mr. Smee, Hook called politely. No one came. Mr. Smee, he said again with a growl, while still smiling at Wendy. Silence. Mr. Smee! The captain finally yelled, slamming his hook down on the table. Blast that man. He'll be at the grog again, no doubt. He leapt up and crashed through the door, muttering under his breath. Confounded, lazy, overpaid. Wendy sat stiffly and continued to look at everything she had already looked at. Eventually, Hook came back, awkwardly carrying a plate of carved beef, a bowl of neeps and tatties, and a beautiful, if stale-looking baguette, all cradled in his hook. Wendy leapt up, but he tissed her back down and actually quite neatly and deftly laid out the feast. Good help is so hard to get, he said apologetically. I should have made him walk the plank years ago. But we go back. He'd saved my life a few times. It's like keeping an old dry cow around because you can't bear the look in her eyes. Oh, Wendy said uncertainly. They concentrated on serving themselves in silence. Wendy wondered if this was what having a distant uncle was like. An odd grown-up who didn't know how to interact properly with young people and often said inappropriate things. So I'm curious, Miss Darling, Hook finally began, with a casual tone so false Wendy's ears practically curled at his words. Whatever made you come to the rather rash decision to trade Peter Pan's shadow to his greatest enemy in exchange for passage to Neverland? Wendy was about to interrupt and point out that Hook wasn't Peter Pan's greatest enemy, depending how you look at it. Peter Pan's greatest enemy could have been growing up, his own sense of self-importance, or his more immediate dangerously foes, the warlike winged Licky, the fanged riders of Upper Hillsdale, or the Cyclops of the Cerulean Sea. Hook was a recurring enemy, not his greatest enemy. Then she thought of better of mentioning it. Well, he never came back for it. He just left it there, she said airily, trying to ignore the agent she had in the decision that what she had done wasn't right, that these words were false. What am I supposed to do? Keep it around for the rest of my life among my trinkets and bric-a-brac? Hanging after me? You seem to want it more than he, and I wanted a little holiday. Everyone is happy. Shall I pour you some water, Captain? Thank you, my dear, but I'll stick to this lovely Barlow. A very interesting argument? Justification, maybe? Now, don't look at me like that. It's just us, Miss Darling, but surely you of all people know that Neverland is a bit trickier than that. There's no holidaying here like Blackpool or south of France. You have made quite the commitment. I can't help but wondering what drove such a pretty, innocent thing like you to have such a desperation, abandoning her life and family to heathenly unknown, and trading in her hero's shadow in the process. Wendy had mixed feelings at these words. On the one hand, they made her sound a little epic. On the other hand, was her life really that dire? Her family loved her. Nana loved her. Ireland was terrible, but it was only for a short period of time, right? And safe? She looked at the pirates, suspicious. In her stories, Captain Hook was always planning, always conniving. He had an angle on everything, even if that angle was stupid and result in ridiculous defeats. So what was he driving at now? Well, it shall make a fascinating chapter in my memoirs, won't it? she said haughtily as she could, pouring herself another glass of tar-scented water. Won't your family miss you? The Mr. and Mrs. Darling? I don't really know how time operates between Neverland and the real world. Perhaps I'll just be gone a day, she answered carelessly. Perhaps it'll be the blink of an eye. Perhaps this is all a dream and I will wake up when it's over back in my bed. Either way, Mother and Father have their hands quite full with Michael and John. I dare say they shan't miss me beyond needing to write an embarrassing explanation to a certain family in Ireland. I just hope Nana remembers to feed Snowball. Well, what about you, Captain Hook? What exactly are your plans for Peter's shadow? Are you going to keep it and hold it over his head forever? In return for your hook? Forever? Hook sat back, looking astonished. Oh no, my dear girl. I have no desire to continue this endless charade with Peter Pan any longer at all. I have wasted far too much of my life on it. My crew hasn't looted a merchant vessel or stormed a port in years. No, I am done with Neverland, rather permanently. I think it's high time I put it and Peter behind me. Rather permanently. That sounds a bit ominous, Wendy observed. Well, it's supposed to. I'm actually quite thrilled by the fact that you will be here as an audience to his and its fate. What are you going to do, if I may ask? Well, my dear, unlike the villains in your quaint little tales, I'm not daft enough to reveal my cunning plans to anyone, a hero or even a bystander like yourself, before carrying them out. Wendy took some umbrage at the term bystander. Wasn't she a pirate ship heading to Neverland of her own volition? Didn't she invent much of the world he inhabited? But there was no pressing issues in her ego. Of course not, she agreed, around a sip of water, so she wouldn't choke on her subterfuge. But surely you couldn't keep such ideas to yourself. Even a great captain like yourself needs help with dirty work and perhaps a sympathetic ear. Well, you are right here, of course, Hook said, swirling his deep red wine in a glass. But I've Mr. Smee, who holds all my secrets dearly. He alone is aware of the not-so-heavily after that awaits all of Neverland. And I'll have you know, Miss Darling, I was rather despairing of ever being able to carry all the details needed for my plans. Your offer of a Peter Shadows came like a miracle out of the blue. Finally, Mr. Smee and I can get on it. Wendy was, however, inadvertently responsible for setting in motion one of Hook's most murderous schemes that involved all of Neverland. Rather permanently, she swallowed and tried to stay calm. Lucky break for you, I suppose, she said casually. But how does it involve Peter Pan's shadow? You couldn't have made all these plans without knowing for certain you could get it, and... Tut-tut, the captain said, shaking a finger like a schoolmarm. It's highly impolite to question a pirate captain so closely when he invited you to lunch, don't you know? Terribly bad form. And Wendy grounded her teeth, defeated. And I'm going to stop it right there.